How hot is it where you are?
Well, I'll tell you how hot it is. It's as hot as I set it to with my air conditioning, Stephen.
How is that not really noisy? What is this voodoo?
It's not that noisy. I mean, these microphones these days don't pick up all that much, and I just think it's fine. We've got it put in like 6 months ago. It cost like $1,000 or something. It hardly costs anything to run it. You put it on like eco setting, and it's great.
£5.50. Can you hear that?
Yeah, that's the problem. You can hear that, and then it's going to make your hair go everywhere.
That's it. I usually wear like a blazer, and I've just gone with a t-shirt today because I'm fucking dying, Andrew.
Oh man,
we're not. Those English people are not made for this heat.
I could have put a coat on.
Woolly gloves, woolly hat. All right,
bloody freezing.
Yeah. Do we even bother doing an intro?
Do what you want, mate.
Welcome to the Night Tube, Andrew Gold. How you doing?
Thanks for having me. Wanted to be here for quite some time. Have I been on before? I don't even know.
You've been on a couple of times. I've been on your show a few times. We've cross-pollinated here and there. So it sounds a little bit sexual, that didn't it?
Yeah. And so it should do.
A lot's changed since we've last spoke. Your YouTube channel has just gone fucking mental. It's massive. Your audience has increased loads. You've worked really hard. And it's paid off. And I'm just wondering, how are you adjusting to this new, larger audience? How are you keeping a handle on what to focus on? How are you managing the increase in comments and feedback that's coming your way?
Well, the first step was getting air conditioning. I felt like an absolute gent at that point. I felt like I'd made it. I said, Mum, I've got air conditioning. For anyone listening outside the UK, it's a rarity in this country. For some reason, we just don't do it. And the reason we did was because my fiance is South American and they all have air conditioning. It was like, why don't we get aircon? I said, because no one in England does that. And she said, but why? And I said, I don't know. It'll make our lives much happier. So now we have it. So that side of stuff has been good. It is difficult because firstly there's a new expectation. I started a new channel. The old channel was mostly cults and stuff. Then it became Meghan Markle stuff. I wasn't really happy with that. It's not what I want to do with my life really. And so I made this new channel, Heretics, which is culture wars. But the idea was, hey, I'm going to cover any kind of heretic. So somebody who has another way that you can cook, someone who says that architecture is being made the wrong way and this is how it should be made, any kind of heresy. But I very quickly found what many of us in sort of the YouTube sphere have found, audience capture, which meant that the stuff that was very vehemently anti-woke, the kind of stuff that you cover a lot and I cover a lot and we're very interested in, if we want to ever branch out, you can't redo it because you've got this ready-made audience that is for that very specific thing, and it just tanks. So it's like, okay, I'm stuck more and more on this topic, and sometimes that is stressful because if you do the same thing over and over again, your views start to go down. So you have to always be more exciting and more crazy and all of these kinds of things. So coming up in the next couple of days, I've got Tommy Robinson coming on.
Oh, fuck me.
Lawrence Fox coming on.
Oh.
These are very extreme names, and I want to get to the bottom of who they are. There's no reason they shouldn't be platformed. I shouldn't speak to them, and I might share a lot of commonalities with them. But that comes from like needing to be more and more extreme just to keep the views at the same level they were when the channel started a few months ago. So that's the kind of pressures that it's brought along.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting because I kind of got the impression when you first started out, because you're very balanced with the way you talk. You're very thoughtful. You come across as a nice guy, and you felt maybe a little bit at the beginning that you was a little bit concerned about being labelled. I felt like maybe it hurt to hear a few accusations thrown your way, and I thought, just give it a few years and he'll be fine. The skin will thicken. And I'm just wondering, now you're talking to people like Tommy Robinson and you're you're addressing kind of gender ideology. These are the kind of areas which will produce the greater amount of smears, and I'm just wondering how you're feeling about that now, having people label you one thing or another. I mean, I think I've seen a little bit of on Twitter where people are like, I can't believe you're going down this direction now. I used to like your content and now you're a transphobe, an Islamophobe, etc. How does that impact you now?
It's painful. It really is. And a lot of people have that kind of bravado or thicker skin and it doesn't really hurt them. And there's an argument like you're not supposed to say it's painful because then they do it more to you. But I feel misunderstood. And I started, the old channel, Cults and Ideologies, that's always interested me for the same reason it's interested you. And I think you and I have a very similar mindset that that a lot of people share, but there aren't that many with, they either go too far one way or the other. And we're both very cynical of any kind of magical thinking, whether it be religious, which is often on the far right, whether it be the woke stuff on the left. And my old channel, I would do all this kind of stuff about, oh, here's a far right lunatic, and this is some person who fell into Jehovah's Witness and all of that stuff, and Hasidic Jews, which I find fascinating, the Hasidic Jewish culture. And then I would do one about Islam, and got absolutely killed for it. And they would say, you'd never do this about the Jews, though, would you? And it's like, I've done 20, in the last few weeks about the Jews. Of course I have. What do you mean?
Familiar.
I bet. And then, gender. And I wanted it to all just be under one channel, one label. And I realized you couldn't do that because there were too many atheists who were just so deeply on board with magical thinking in the woke variety. And it so clearly is that thing to anybody who's outside of it. And so I had to go down that route. I do like to see myself as a nice guy. We all do, don't we? I mean, that's just everyone wants to be liked. And I have that very strongly. And recently in promoting my book, I've had plenty of, pretty every festival and every bookshop that Pan Macmillan have put me forward to has come back, has initially said yes, and then looked into me and come back and said, we've had to disinvite him because he's a controversial figure. Now, evolutionarily, that's you being thrown out of your tribe. You're off to die in the savannah. And so as much as you're often, I'm hanging around with people like you and the trigonometry guys and all of these people, and you start to feel, okay, we've got our group. I suppose it's our cult in a way, and all the listeners and the viewers. As much as we have that, and that really does help, when you get an email like that, it's really very painful. It hurts physically. And you go, God, I'm outside. I'm on the outside. How did that happen? But that's what you got to put up with. I mean, how do you put up with it? I mean, you're more in the wars than I am. Every time I look at your Twitter, you're going, and I wonder, when you're having these fights back and forward, what emotions are you feeling?
It's very flat with me. And I don't think this makes me any better at coping. I just think it's a kind of accident of maybe my biology. Perhaps I don't get too invested in it, and when it's got put away in my pocket, doesn't intrude on the rest of my day. I mean, my partner might be the best person to ask for this, to be fair, whether or not it kind of intrudes or gets in the way, for sure. But it's interesting what you say there about it hurts. And I think you're right. I think it still does hurt me when somebody labels me something, but I've got experience now. I kind of understand where that's coming from, what it's about, and I know how to navigate through it. I think that's the difference from maybe when you're starting out at the beginning, because it comes as somewhat of a shock and a surprise, because you know your own heart, you know your own mind, you're not a racist, a transphobe or whatever, and when you see that, it's a bit of a shock. But when you realise it's kind of a way of weaponising smears in order to shut you down, it's easier to navigate. But I think it makes it impossible. I mean, you say that I've got it worse. I mean, I'm more of a scrapper on Twitter, perhaps, but I think the size of your audience now, I would imagine you're getting a larger amount of comments from like YouTube and things like that. And I just think that it's difficult now to know whether you are going too far in one direction because of this, because you will instantly kind of gravitate towards the comments that are telling you you're doing a good job. Perhaps you will put aside the ones that are telling you you're not. You might see genuine criticism as just part of a kind of woke agenda or something. So I tend to just kind of fall back on first principles whenever I can, kind of examine. It's interesting, actually, just to segue into your book, because you talk a lot about I believe like prosocial lies, rather, these kind of little white lies we tell, and I catch myself doing this sometimes, and you kind of think, am I a sociopath? Am I a psychopath? Like I've got this inbuilt rule just reflexively now, where if there's a female that I know and I notice she's changed her hair in any way, even if I don't like it, even if I'm indifferent to it, my reflexive comment is always, oh, I like your hair. I've just learnt that over the years.
Let me I'm talking quietly, but my cleaner is outside, and I just said, we've got a cleaner. Yes, it's very in case anyone's going, God, he's changed.
Aircon cleaners.
I know, and I make sure the aircon's off when she's cleaning, so she doesn't benefit from anything. But she's, as I said, I've got a meeting now. Oh, I love your hair, by the way, and came in. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, that is funny. And I've noticed as well, whenever someone gives me good news of their own, and I say, oh, that's great, I'm really happy for you, sometimes I'm not happy for them. Sometimes I'm very envious. Sometimes I don't care. Sometimes they're burdening me with something I'm not interested in. But you always fall into them roles, and you speak very much about that in your book, about how we kind of flip between our personal and public personas and kind of put on a mask depending on who we're talking to. And how do we better recognise that in ourselves then?
Oh, bloody hell. Well, I don't know that prosocialize are necessarily a bad thing. And I'd even go as far as to say, when you ask if you're a psychopath, there's a point in the book where I think Sam Harris says about absolute truth. There's a point in my book where Sam Harris says, I mean, I just wrote that Sam Harris said a thing. Sam Harris was not involved in my life whatsoever. I'd love for him to be. But he wrote this book called Lying, about how it's best to always tell the truth. And he spoke about, even with a Nazi at your door, asking if you're hiding a Jew upstairs in the attic or whatever, it's still best to tell the truth. And he goes into a whole philosophical thing about it, and you go, wow, that's interesting. I wonder what the best thing to do then when there's and he doesn't really say. And then at the end he says, of course, that's only theory. Only a psychopath would endorse this philosophy entirely. Only a psychopath could actually insist that you tell the truth all the time. Interestingly, on that note, when I was on Trigonometry, Konstantin Kissin and Francis Foster, great podcast for anyone who does. I mean, if they're in our space, they'll know it. When I finished, he said on his face, no, on his podcast, he said, oh, that was really good. Well done. Really, really happy. That was very, very good. And I said, oh, thank you. Although you probably wouldn't say if it wasn't very good, would you now? And he said, no. Why wouldn't I? And I said, well, because it's a bit awkward. It's
a bit rude.
If someone's just spent an hour and a half gazing into your eyes and saying, and you just go like, thanks for coming in and, taking hours out of your day and driving in and coming to the place, but you were really not very good. Like, who would do that? And he said, well, you should tell people the truth, shouldn't you? I went, oh, right. And it's just different personality types, I suppose. I could never do that. I do think we should tell the truth more, but at no point will anyone come into my studio, spend hours, of their time, give their soul to us, in a sense. The cameras, they're opening up, and I'm going to sit there and go, that wasn't really very good, mate. No.
Having said that, I genuinely laughed out loud, or lolled, as the kids say, when reading your book, when you recounted the time you interviewed a psychopath, and just to kind of test whether or not she could be hurt by your opinions, told her a book was shit. And that really tickled me.
Yes.
And I can't remember, I don't think you noticed any kind of flicker of emotion on the face of this person.
I was trying to see if there was any. I mean, that's Emmy Thomas, who wrote Confessions of a Sociopath. And yeah, it's scary because she was obsessed with this idea of not being recognized. But she's been on other podcasts before where she's fine. But with me, she put the sellotape over the webcam so we couldn't see what she looked like. There are pictures of her online. So I didn't really get it. And she sort of explained it in a really weird way. She was like, oh, well, I just don't like, that you can manipulate the footage if I show who I am. I don't know what it was like. It made no sense.
Was she Woody Allen?
She was saying, listen to me, hey, Andrew, the thing about life is, I'm walking here, she was saying. It's Dustin Hoffman did. She I don't know, she had that exact accent though for some reason. The thing is, Andrew, and she said, sorry. So months later, she'd been in more and more things. Her face was showing. And so which is how I described it to her, but I mean I changed the thumbnail to have her face in it. Because why not? I can't just have a blur in the thumbnail, and the video's going to start to do better if her face is in it. She texted me or emailed me livid about this, like 2 months later when she noticed. And I happened to be out at a wedding in the countryside with no reception, so couldn't change it quickly. But I was desperate to change it because she scared the shit out of me. I thought she was going to come and kill me or something. But fortunately, to this date, she has not managed to do so.
That's really interesting, and I think it kind of ties into something I was going to pick up later, so I'll try and weave into it now. But I've done this all backwards. I've not even read the title of your book, Andrew, which is The Psychology of Secrets: My Adventures with Murderers, Cults, and Influencers, rather. And the reason I struggled on influences there is because I tried really hard on cults, because my brain always says, "Don't say cunts, don't say cunts, don't say cunts," and blew it.
Yep.
Blew it. Because now I've said it 5 times, so I might as well have just said it. But This interesting thing about you talking to psychopaths and people that are a little, on the fringe, on the face of it, a little bit scary, and you also delve into a kind of darker area of kind of human psychology and crime, and that's the idea of like minor attracted people. I think is the progressive nomenclature now. Non-offending paedophiles, and you recount your experiences of meeting two in person in your book, and I'm just wondering what's the kind of level of fear of safety there. These people are revealing something very dark, very secret. This is giving you power in a sense where if you was to announce it in certain circles, it could end with their death. Basically, you could put a target on their back. Did you feel at that point maybe there was a threat to your safety in terms of maybe they could have changed their mind midway through this and thought of a way to kind of tie up loose ends?
Yeah, I mean, I met a lot of these minor attracted people, and I suppose we use that word, I guess, for just YouTube censors, because if you use the P word, it'll just kill your video, not because we're trying to normalize the act of the P word, which some people sometimes claim we're trying to do, and I'm sure some people are trying to do that, but that's not. I speak for both of us. That's not our intention. The first guy I met it's not actually in the book. The first guy I met when I first did this, because I was just hanging about in Germany. I think I just started the podcast, or maybe I hadn't even started it. And I was living in Germany because I'm obsessed with languages, and German was my fifth. And so I was out there 2 or 3 years with my missus, and I said to her, right, I'm going to make another documentary or a book or I don't know what about these people. And she was like, oh, do you have to do that? Of all the topics. Now, little did she know, a couple of years later, I'd be in trans and all that, which is somehow significantly worse for her and everyone at work and all the people who know her. I don't know how that's possible, but that's the society we're in right now. That's significantly more controversial than the P word that we were doing, that I was doing. And because there happened to be this therapy called Don't Offend out there, kind Täter werden, don't become an offender. And they are basically the only therapy they claim to be in the world that doesn't report these people to authorities. And so I said, can you link me up with any of these people? I want to meet them. I want to get inside their heads and know what's what. And they said, well, we'll give them your email address. We can't give you theirs because they're all anonymous. That's the whole point. So I said, okay. And a few weeks later, this fella who called himself Max, just a weird email address, bunch of numbers and weird letters and stuff, he messaged and he goes, hey, he emailed me and he said, I'll be in Berlin today and this is the only day I'm here, but you can come meet me. Here's the address. So I said, bloody hell. So I had to cancel my date with my fiance and say, okay, I'm going to go down and meet Max. So she wasn't happy and thought it was weird. But I was like, I've got to do this. But at that point, I don't have like BBC bodyguards or something. I don't have a security. It's just me hoping to do a thing. So I go down there and it turns out the address he's given me is a public swimming pool. So it's a Schwimmbad, as they call them in Germany. And that's a weird place for a PDF file, as we call them, to meet a journalist. So I get there, heart thumping. It's the first time. And the problem is with the whole journalism thing is I'm now desensitized to it because I've met so many over the years, whereas a lot of people are hearing this first time. And I've got to be aware of that and not be too jovial about it because it is nuts. My heart was in my mouth. I was like nearly crying. It was so weird. And I got there and I had to pay to go into this Schwimmbad. And I tried to find him. I'm messaging him going, okay, which one are you? And he was, unfortunately, the fella in the Speedos with like a T-shirt hanging over his Speedos, overweight, looked like you'd imagine he looked. But he was with a little girl. So I said, oh, hello. And the little girl went off to play. And I said, what's going on here, Max? Who's this little girl? And he said, oh, well, her mum lets me babysit her. And then I was like, well, okay, I'm in too deep. This is mental. And I said, what do you mean? Does the mum definitely know? And he goes, yep, she knows. And all this stuff. And I said, but you've got to realise you're just putting yourself, you're like an alcoholic behind a bar here because you're telling me you don't offend, which is what he did tell me. And yet and it turned out he had 3 girls with him at this swimming pool. All of them they were all the same mum, or one was a different mum actually. So 2 from the same mum and 1 from a different mum. And he's just claiming they all knew. So over the next few weeks, I met the mum and she was just mental and really left wing. And she believed that these people were a sort of minority and that we have to trust them more because just because they've got the belief or the condition or the urge doesn't mean they'll offend, which is absolutely true, but you don't experiment with your own children. You experiment with yourself on these kinds of things. You don't put your kids through that. So I was just in this place where it was like, I'm in so deep now and my head, it's probably the hardest few weeks of my life, just completely all over the place.
Yeah, it's crazy because that that topic for me, I mean, I like to think that, I suppose, if I'm being kind to myself on occasion, I like to think that maybe I am a bit brave and I don't care what people think about me, and I'll tackle Islam, I'll take on the gender ideologues, I'll take on the far right, I'll take on the far left. But when you kind of get into that really murky realm of, child abuse or being attracted to children, I don't feel like there's any way I can first of all, I don't think I could do it justice. I think it would take somebody like you, or somebody a lot smarter than me as well, certainly. But I don't think I don't think I could live with the idea that somebody thought that I was sinister in relationship to children. I think that's where the line is. I'm just wondering how, there must have been various points with you looking into this, because this is a real thing. It's a massive problem in society. It's very little understood. I'm perfectly of the belief that the more we understand things, the easier it is to combat it, treat it, prevent it, find it, etc. So it's a worthy endeavour, but there must surely be a part of you that thinks, I don't want to be the paedophile guy.
Yeah, well, that was it. But I was at a point in my career, and it's, what is it that begets necessity? Necessity begets invention. What is it? What's the expression?
I thought it was violence begets great. It's all about baguettes. It must be a French philosopher.
Who's this baguette guy? He loved it. His bread and everything. I said bread in case there were some listeners who didn't get the pun you were doing. I just wanted to make sure everybody got the baguette.
Thanks for getting my back.
Yeah, all the baguettes. I begot your back. So it was really. It's okay. Well, let's pretend there's an expression called necessity begets invention, right? Let's just pretend that's the thing. And the point
right
is,
on the edge of my tongue, this expression. I'll think of it by the time you go.
Shall I chat GPT it?
Let's just Google it. We can edit it and just make
Google
it seem
and
like
I'll
we're
chat
really
GPT
smart.
and see who gets there first.
Okay.
What is an...
Just a close Pornhub.
Okay, begets invention.
Necessity begets ingenuity.
That's not very catchy, is it?
Necessity is the mother of invention.
ChatGPT is giving me desperation drives action. I'll go with that. I don't really like it, but desperation drives action. And I was very desperate and in need of action driving. I remember, this was just after, as you know from my story, I'd made these documentaries for the BBC, HBO, and all about weird subcultures and things. This was years ago now, and was then told that because I'm a white man, if I want to continue, I have to be off screen, and other people minorities will be on screen in my place and sort of pretend they did the stories. So that's where I was. And, the very real implication of that, or the consequences of that, is that 5 years later, I was on minimum wage, not doing very well at all compared to all of my cohorts, and struggling to get by, really, just finding bits of work to do every now and then online, like little bits of copywriting and stuff. I did that for about 5 or 6 years while not being able to do anything. And I remember thinking specifically with this topic, as noble as it is, I'd love to tell the story of, no, this is just something I wanted to really pursue and really look into and expose different aspects of it. It was really a matter of, it was that, but it was also, well, John Ronson and Louis Theroux, even though Theroux has gone into that, but they probably don't want to write a book about this or get involved in this or in any way, because it's such a dirty, disgusting subject. Well, how am I ever going to, be as... I have to do something that they wouldn't be willing to do, basically. So that's what started it. And of course, you're absolutely right. There is this really sad part of our culture that thinks if you talk about a taboo subject, you must somehow sympathize with the action itself. So I just think that all I sort of told myself, like when talking about this, I just have to make it extremely clear, because there are bad actors out there who will jump at the chance to feel good about themselves by having a go at someone else and making those kinds of accusations. It's almost written into our DNA. And it means, unfortunately, that we don't talk about the topic itself. So I usually start by saying, look, 1 out of 6, it's thought, girls are abused as children, right? And it's a bit less for boys. And at the moment, pretty much all we do is, as the woke would say, we victim blame. We tell the kids, make sure you don't go into the woods, make sure you don't do this and that. And I think that's all very good. We need to do that, of course. But it's still a huge number of children who are being, this kind of thing is happening to them. It's thought that 1 out of every 100 men has this attraction. So in 100 men, it's relatively rare, but across an entire country, it's larger than the army. It's actually a substantial portion of a population. So they are out there. And all I hear from people is just lock them up, kill them, get rid of them. And it's like, well, that's that's wonderful. And I have no judgment on that in terms of, well, you shouldn't kill people or whatever. Fill your boots. I don't care. But you can't catch them all. You'll never find them all, and more are always being made. So at the moment, we're victim blaming the kids, and we're just having fantasies about killing all the perpetrators. And we're not actually doing anything that addresses the subject, because everybody is so scared that they can't even bring up the subject for fear that someone will say, haha, you must be one of them, which is bonkers, because those people are the last people who would bring it up, because they just want to go undercover and just do their own thing. We need to talk about it more. And one of the main reasons for this, and this is what the German clinic says, look, there are some of these guys who are going to do what they're going to do anyway. They're psychopaths, or they're psychopathic PDF files. They're just going to do their thing. We can't really stop them. We can try as hard as we can, try and lock them up, whatever. There are also guys with this condition who will never offend, because they have the attraction, which is very unfortunate for them or whatever it is, but they know that it's the worst thing you can do in the world, is to do that stuff with a kid. It's the worst thing you can do in our society. In the middle, there are a bunch of people who might one day do something once or twice that would ruin a child's life. And those are the people that this clinic in Berlin wants to get in to have therapy, to disabuse them of notions such as, oh, it's okay to offend because blah, blah, blah. And we know from different kinds of criminal activity that when we push people away and there's a lot of stigmatization and they're not able to get help, and those people can't currently go to therapy in the UK, Australia, America, doctors have to report them to authorities, and we don't know what happens to them after that, so they don't go to therapy. In Germany they do. If they are pushed away, then all they do is they retreat to the dark corners of the internet. They go to the dark web and all of these kinds of things. And all of them just convince one another that actually it's okay to do the worst thing in the world. So we've got to do something, because 1 in 6 at the moment, and there are different stats. Some say 1 in 9, some say 1 in 10, but it's a substantial portion of young girls around the world. And we're just sitting there just wiping our hands of it because we're too scared. I just think it's pathetic and cowardly. And we've got to do something. It's what Elon Musk said. It's that difference between looking good and doing good. Looking good is just saying like, oh God, they're all terrible, lock them up. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't help those children. Doing good is, I hope, being brave enough to stand up and say, maybe it's disgusting. Maybe these people are disgusting. I don't care. We've got to get them into therapy and stop them doing that stuff to kids, because that's the only way we're going to curb this.
Yeah, that well said. And I mean, that chapter in your book is a particularly challenging one, I would imagine, for most people. But it's very well reasoned. It's, just to be clear, it's like laser focused where your perspective is on this and the way you're approaching it and the reasons why. And I do think it's very brave, because it's like I say, it's one of them. I mean, I think you referenced this in your book. I think, like, most men have this irrational fear that they're going to be exposed as a paedophile, even though it's like there's no way. But it's just kind of this fear in the background. I don't know if you kept up with the trials and tribulations of Louis C.K., but he's still kind of releasing specials quite regularly, just via his website now, outside of mainstream circles. And he has a whole bit on this about how it's a man's greatest fear, and basically tells the audience who were in the room at the time that statistically one of their kids will be a paedophile. And it's dark. Seek it out. He obviously does it better than I do. But I mean, as I saw you the other day as well, you popped up on Piers Morgan. And that's, I can't, is he on Talk TV now, or is he on his own channel? I can't remember who he it's
his own channel.
It's his own channel now, is it? And tell me about that experience. What's that like? Because he's one of those figures in the UK that is so divisive, so loathed or loved, depending on which direction you're coming from. How did you find that experience?
Well, you know what? That's a really interesting point, because I also think there's a great hypocrisy around characters like him. Jeremy Clarkson would be another one. Sorry, Americans. Americans might know because of the car things that he did. He did all the car programs. Jeremy Clarkson, I'll go with him actually. Okay, you know, I'm upset because I've been cancelled from all of these events. The reason I was cancelled, some of the stuff I do is about diversity and it's upsetting for people. Some of it's about Islam and the relationship with the left. I think the main reason is gender. The main reason is saying trans women are not women. This might be a mental illness, and this is not the best way to help these people. That gets you cancelled from everywhere. But we all know that Jeremy Clarkson believes the same thing, right? At least. Jeremy Clarkson has said things that are significantly more offensive than anything I'd even dare say. And he's even punched someone in the face. He drove around Argentina with a thing baiting the Argentinians about the Malvinas on his number plate. These kinds of things I wouldn't dream of doing. And yet you turn on the TV and he's there, ITV, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, hosting it day after day. He just got voted England's sexiest man. I think it's half a joke, of course, but
that is very funny.
People voted. Yeah, I mean, they like him enough to vote, even if they don't, actually find him that sexy or whatever. And I think Piers, you're right. He's very, very controversial, but he'd be welcome way before I would be in any kind of festival, in any kind of book thing. I don't think it would be such an issue. And I think this speaks to a hypocrisy at the heart of the kind of woke censorship stuff, because those bookshops that didn't want me in them, no doubt have got loads of Jordan Peterson books, for example. And the fact is, if you're big enough to sell well, and if you're a big enough name around the country, then you don't get cancelled and you're allowed to speak and you're allowed to be wherever you want. And Piers Morgan, Jeremy Clarkson, Jordan Peterson, these are names that, even though they're woke or anti-woke, they are huge names. And if you're big enough and you're going to sell that bookshop there a number of books, then you're all right. So that pisses me off. With regards to Piers, I was excited to go on. The only thing I'd say is he's obviously very busy, and I was hoping it would be like, I turn up, we have a chat before, how you doing, mate? And we get all of this stuff. But what really happens is he's already interviewing someone else. You're waiting in the sort of waiting room. And I was there with Ava Santina and James Burr, I think, very woke people. So you sort of understand just by who's there what side you're supposed to take, because it's all about sides there. Which, by the way, I he's very controversial, but I think he actually deserves praise for this, because it's very hard to grow any kind of YouTube audience by having both sides, even if it is done in a very sensationalist, everyone shouting over each other kind of way. Most of us are just interviewing other people who agree with us and so on, whereas he's having all sorts of people with different views and opinions. So fair play to him for that. But I'm in there with them, and it felt a little bit high school. It felt a bit like those two were quite friendly with each other, and they've been on a few times before, and I was sort of stood there near them in my silly little suit, like, hello, little dork. And then you get ushered in, and Piers sort of looks up, and you go, hello, and you go, oh, hello, and you sort of, you don't really get many words, and suddenly you're live. And then when we're done, we're ushered out. So I didn't really get to talk to, and that's the thing, he's got the star quality, and he couldn't possibly spend time talking to every single person who comes on his thing, and but it was tough. And the other thing is, as you know, my style, similar to yours, I think, is apart from your Twitter persona, actually, is not that antagonistic. And so the whole time I'm thinking, am I being antagonistic enough to be invited back on the show?
Okay.
Can I be more angry? Can I say the wrong? And so, they're talking about Kevin Spacey, and I know I'm supposed to be the one that's saying, hey, free speech and all that. But all I'm thinking is, but I watched that, I hadn't watched that documentary at the time, but I was thinking, oh, but he probably did some pretty bad things to some people. And I don't want to, I don't know what I think about this. But then I'm going like, oh, come on. People just, if someone gave them a blowjob so they could rise up in the profession? I'm saying stuff I think I'm supposed to say. And then Ava turns to me and said, what, so you think it's all right? You watched the documentary. You think it's all right then that he was doing this and that in the corridor to this woman and to this man and to this, and I hadn't seen it. So I had to pretend I had, and I was like, yeah, damn right it is, actually. But I didn't think that. So, yeah, that's the funny thing with those, that you're really pushed into these almost grotesque caricatures of yourself to sort of, almost like being hypnotized. When you're hypnotized, they say that part of it is the expectation from the audience. You can't stop yourself from clucking like a chicken because that's how the trick is supposed to go. And I think there's an aspect of that on those kinds of shows.
That's interesting. So are we essentially saying all these conversations, it's just theatre, it's just entertainment? We're not really unravelling deep truths about the human condition and geopolitics and, war, famine, etc. We're all just kind of jostling for space at the front of a stage.
Well, very few world wars and things are sort of solved in podcasts. We'd like to think that we're all doing it. I think one of the reasons that my YouTube's done well, and definitely the reason Piers has, is always keeping front and center that as much as you would like to be virtuous and like extolling all of this wisdom into the world, entertainment is vitally important. How you look, how the show looks, how it feels, the humor is something you do very well as well. we have to laugh sometimes. We have to be funny sometimes, because at the end of the day, if we could sit here and take ourselves really seriously and say we're going to solve everything, but we know that's not the case. I think people want to listen, people want to watch, because they want to be part of these discussions and they want to hear what other people think about them. But that I like I say, I do respect that on Piers, at least it's differing views, but it does end up a shouting match. I mean, look, I said to the Ava beforehand, I said, look, say whatever you want to me, I don't mind. Almost I just said that as a preemptive defense mechanism, because I knew she was going to anyway. And it was a way of saying, I'm cool, I'm not going to get upset. But afterwards we were walking out and I'd forgotten I'd said that. And I said, Ava, you called me stupid. And she said, well, you did say to say whatever, you didn't care. And I was like, oh, yeah, I suppose I did. I forgot that. But I wasn't ready for that, So I definitely think, look, I think he's got a great show. It's really entertaining. They definitely touch on like the two-sidedness that most, the both sidesism that most things ignore. But, in many respects, a lot of the time it is just theatre and it is just quite superficial.
Yeah. I mean, you've got, Piers Morgan interviews people as these fiery debates. You've got hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of interviews under your belt now. And I thought it was funny when you were kind of recounting your interview with Richard Dawkins and how kind of terse and to the point he is, one word answers, no, I don't know, and you suddenly realise you're running out of questions and you have this, panicked moment, and I think you say you cut the interview short in the end. And I've been in them kind of situations before. I mean, I've started talking and asking a question having no idea where it's going, and I've had to kind of weave back into reality at some point because you just talk. And I just wondered, have you got better at that now? Do you ever have this horrible fear that you're going to either get caught out or just have nothing to say?
I'm trying to get better. I think you're absolutely right. It's a horrible feeling, that, isn't it? And we all go blank. Every single person I've ever met does it, but you don't expect it of, say, Jordan Peterson or just to use someone else, Obama. You don't expect Obama to be giving a speech and just go, hang on, I forgot what I was going to say.
It's fucking Woody Allen again.
it's well, this country is very important. I think that's quite good. I don't know. I wish I were better at accents. That's the one thing I wish I could do. It's really hard, and I think one of the things I want to get better at is pushing back on people. I'm so desperate, I think, to be liked, and I think that's a trait that people have enjoyed about my interviews. They can see that I'm not going to judge that person morally. There's very, very little, maybe nothing, that you could say right now, for example, that would lead me to feel morally better than you. I really think there's very little, unless it was like a real admission of something that you've done involving like the previous subjects we talked about or something like that. There's very little. And even then I would want to go, why did you do that? And rather than, I'm better than you and so on. But that's sometimes a weakness when you're interviewing people. And I think I've let some people get away with saying things, some people who are significantly further in the anti-woke or the further right spectrum, where I've just maybe could have pushed back a little bit more. I think of, Carl Benjamin said he's as far right as it gets, and that's really interesting to me. But maybe there was we had a little debate where he was saying that fairness, right? This was it. I said, how is it fair that some people are born in a bin in Bangladesh and some people are born with my life? That's utterly not fair. And he was just going, well, yes, it is. That's fair. That's what happened. That's fair. That's fine. And I should have pushed it. I think I felt uncomfortable pushing back and then stopped. And I wish I had maybe taken a lesson from you, because you are good at this and I am getting better at it. And just said, well, obviously that's not fair. And I think where he and I would agree is by trying too hard to make it fair, we're actually causing more damage than good as a society. That's the issue. If you get too authoritarian in trying to make everything equitable, that's where the problem lies. But the idea that this Bangladeshi bin person and me have had a fair start is absurd to me. So that's what I need to get better at.
It's an interesting one, Carl. I've met him on a number of occasions. I've been at conferences in America with him, in fact, and spoke. As a matter of fact, there's a picture of me and Carl having quite a heated argument at 4:00 in the morning in a bar.
I've seen it
on the internet somewhere over some topic, which I can't quite remember what it was now. But I mean, what I like about him, even if you don't kind of agree with his views, and this is where I kind of come into this thing in terms of controversial people, is that he's always willing to have a conversation. He'll discuss his ideas with you. He's not going to shout you down. I think he'll sit down and speak with anyone, much the way you do, the trigonometry guys do. I think that's the line I think we have to come in at in terms of people we think are kind of on the political extremes. Are they open to discussion? How far have they gone in either direction, kind of thing?
Well, there's something I've been thinking about, because I still want to go back into documentaries. That's sort of my first love. I loved doing that, and it would only make sense for me now to do it. To look at the culture wars. And I remember Louis Theroux, he used to do all this stuff about Nazis and the Westboro Baptist Church, and they always tended to be these sort of people on the right. And he's been asked about that, and he said, well, they're just more entertaining than the people on the left. Now, the culture has changed now, but to an extent, I know what he means. There's something about, I think the far right and the far left, I'm not the first to say this, of course, are the same thing ultimately. It's just people who are lunatics. And they go too far one way or the other, and they're just egotistical, and they're idealistic as well, and they don't live in the real world. The one difference, though, is that the right, even on the far right, seems to want to show the middle ground. Like, hey, I'm not a bad guy. These are just the beliefs I hold. I'm not awful. The reason I hate Jews is such and such. They want to explain and they want to be seen. Whereas the left, you've seen time and time again, the way that they protest is a little bit different. They will not talk. And I saw this stuff the other day. Suella Braverman was going over to all these different people, just mouths shut, vacant eyes, vacant expressions. So I would love to do that kind of Louis Theroux kind of thing, because all the documentaries you see, it's like people turning up at the protests and just making them look silly or whatever. What I would want to do is like Louis would have done, is go back to the family of one of these guys or one of these girls who's doing the activism, see them when they're making their signs saying, death to Israel or whatever, and be there with like their mum. When their mum's going, oh, you're going on another march today? Sure am, mum. God, are you going to have any fish and chips though first? I want to see that side of them. But would they open up in the way that the right would? I don't know.
It's a difficult one, that, and I suppose this kind of ties into this idea of you kind of being excommunicated from mainstream. We'll have to probably assume left-wing circles now because of your views, which will have the a knock-on effect of you now appearing on what's perceived to be quote-unquote right-wing media, and then you'll have the accusation you only appear on right-wing media, and to which you'd have to say the Guardian's not knocking on my door, for instance. But I've had this experience on the ground myself at a lot of these protests for gender. I've been out there, Edinburgh, Manchester, Liverpool, London, a few times, and I can never get the left-wing protesters to speak to me. It's a complete wall of silence, masks on, nothing, just pure either silence or hostility. And I'm not, like, I come down on one side of this debate very clearly and very emphatically, but I want to hear what they think. I just want to get what they think on record, and then people can listen and make up their own mind. And I might push back depending on how crazy it is, but I do this with the other side too. But they are not willing to say what they think, and I find that, really, if you're going to be cynical, very suspicious.
Well, yes, and I wonder this sometimes as well. So the suspicion there is because they know that they don't really have the any knowledge to back up what they're saying.
Exactly.
I've thought that, but then I've thought that's not what I've encountered or experienced with human beings. Human beings are incredibly arrogant about their positions. So, like, even the hard thing here is, like, I think of Scientology. I've done all the cult stuff, and I spoke to my friend. You may have interviewed him, Aaron Smith-Levin, from the Growing Up in Scientology channel. He used to be a Scientologist, and he always says to me, I went out to see him in Clearwater, where the Scientology headquarters is recently, and he even now says when he was in Scientology, there is literally nothing, not a thing you could say to him that would have convinced him to leave, or that anything in Scientology was wrong. Now, if somebody had come to speak and debate with him, it might be that he shut them down as well. But he wasn't sitting there thinking, because, shit, I don't actually know what I'm talking about. He's just thinking, well, that's what we're supposed to do. Everybody in our group's doing it. They're evil, all the people talking to us, so we're just going to shut them down. I saw some really interesting evidence, or some experiment or data or whatever recently, that showed that we think that our beliefs are formed in the pursuit of truth and accuracy. So we think I wonder what's true. I'm going to think about it, and that's how our beliefs are formed. And all evidence points to the contrary, that actually our beliefs form based on the people we're in and around and what will make them think we're good people. And that's worrying not just for the left and the right, but for me and you, because we're now in this group. And as you're pointing out yourself, we get moved more into the group that will accept us, and our beliefs will change alongside theirs. That doesn't mean there's not one single truth, but there are definitely interpretations and different values and different ways of thinking of the world. So the only way a Scientologist ever changes their beliefs, ever, pretty much ever, is not because they wake up and go, God, this is all mad. That never happens. They have to be treated so badly by their own tribe, so badly, that they have no choice but to leave. And only then do the beliefs start to change. It even takes time then. It can take years. They've left Scientology, they were treated terribly, and they still believe the stuff might be true, but they just don't want to think about it too much. And it takes years, and then them being love-bombed by anti-Scientologists for them to begin to adopt the opposite beliefs. Well, that's going to be the same with the woke lefties. They will only leave their woke groups when their own treat them so badly. And the best evidence of that is with Jews, right? Because that is the one place where the woke culture thing sort of falls down for Jewish people. Now, don't get me wrong. Firstly, there are just as many Jewish woke people as there are any other kind of woke people. And secondly, even now, there still are many of them who have stayed there. But I know loads of Jewish people, and I'm Jewish myself, of course, but I wasn't involved in the whole woke thing. But I know loads who are in academia, they're in book publishing. And if you're in those kind of groups, you're going to be woke, most of them, because that's who's around you, that's your group, that's your tribe. And only when the Jewish-Palestine stuff started coming out, or the Israel-Palestine stuff started coming out, did they start to have this dissonance between going home and speaking to Auntie so-and-so, who's just had this horrible experience of their cousin in Israel, and this has happened to them, and that's happened, and then going back into university, where they're saying what happened on October 7th was just resistance. You know, what happened to those children, what happened to party goers, the most awful, horrible thing. Oh, that's just resistance. And that is an example of these Jewish woke people in their group feeling like they're treated so badly by their own group, they have no choice but to leave. And only then, months and months and months later, are they able to start questioning the other beliefs. Hang on, maybe this trans thing that a man can be a woman, maybe that's actually dangerous to someone. You know, the other stuff starts to come after. That's what we're dealing with here.
That's fascinating. And I've got this little pet theory that kind of ties into this, and it's not backed up by any sort of science or data, but I get the impression, I mean, you take someone like Richard Dawkins, for instance, who's very gender critical now, but that's born out of his critical thinking. He's always been a critical thinker. He's always been a man of science. It logically tracks that that's where he would end up. That's fine. But then you have a lot of people who are personalities, opinion formers, who are thought of as, you know, public intellectuals who have been forged in the fire of cancellation. I'm talking, you know, Jordan Peterson, even Lawrence Fox to an extent, Brett Weinsteins of this world. And it feels like anyone who was born in the fire of cancellation by whatever side of the tribe it was, they'll eventually go too far in the opposite direction because they were never really underpinned by critical thought. I don't know how you feel about that kind of approximation of people like Jordan Peterson, Lawrence Fox, Brett Weinstein, if you're even familiar with his work.
Yeah, I don't know too much about Brett. I think he might be an anti-vaxxer, is that right?
Hardcore.
So this is an issue because I love a vaccine. Right, and this maybe is the sort of Woody Allen Jewish thing, but if there's a vaccine going, like sign me up. I'm putting them. I got the flu one the other month. I just don't want to be. I hate being ill. I don't know if it works. I don't know the science, and I know there are people listening because of the audiences that you and I both attract. There will be a percentage, particularly the louder vocal minority, who will. They usually write it like this. The comment always goes, and you've seen this before. He lost me at. And it's just brilliant. It's just like you enjoyed everything else the person had to say, but they disagreed with you on one thing that you have found so critical to your belief system that you now think he must be wrong about everything else. He lost me at. And I'd like to think that I wouldn't do that. Even if somebody who I really respected they're talking about, I don't know, atheism or whatever it is, and then they say trans women are women, that might piss me off and I might disagree, but he didn't lose me at that. It's just I disagreed with him on that severely. And I wonder what else we can agree on. So there are others as well. I mean, it's not just the sort of, you're right with, I guess, Lawrence and all of these people, they'll go so far one way. But there's even like, I had this conversation with Julie Bindel the other day. And Julie Bindel is like a hardcore, old school leftist. And and who I get on with well. So I hope she doesn't see this as sort of calling her out or anything like this. But I said to her in our podcast, we were talking about gender, and she was talking about, this, how ridiculous it is that trans people can be in women's sports and all these kinds of things. And I said to her, well, 15 years ago, weren't you saying that women can do anything men can do? And she said, well, now I realise that I was a bit too far on that. And she went into and that's another example where I wish I had the courage to sort of push back a bit more and go, well, hang on. I'm on side with you with the trans thing. However, let's investigate that a little bit more, because you're now admitting that 10, 15 years ago, you were moved not by accuracy, but by emotion. For very good reasons. She felt that women were being victims to men. She was a hardcore feminist, and she was right about a lot of it. But some of it, the truth was stretched and exaggerated. And I think with Lawrence, maybe that's sort of a right-wing version. I don't know enough. I'm trying to look up stuff he said before I interview him, where I think, oh, that's too far, that's not right, and that kind of thing. So yeah, but basically that's a long way of saying I absolutely agree with you. There was a great debate I watched recently in person between Dawkins and Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who, for those who don't know, had a fatwa against her, just like Salman Rushdie had, and who recently converted to Christianity, much to the chagrin of many in the atheist community. And they had this big debate about Christianity, and it was fascinating to watch. And she kept saying what is being said a lot on the anti-woke circles right now, which is, look what's happened. Christianity's gone away, and all this woke stuff, because magical thinking has risen. And so we needed Christianity. And Dawkins was just steadfast in saying, no, we need rational thinking. We need to teach rational thinking. That's what we teach. We don't teach, Christianity or wokeness. Both of them are irrelevant. We teach rational thinking. And she wasn't having it, because she's now a Christian. And there is this big idea, like, we have to replace the woke stuff with Christianity. And maybe the problem with rational thinking is, and I think Dawkins even touched on this, is it's not very sexy. It's not a sexy thing to teach in the same way that wokeism, in the same way that Christianity is. I think rational thinking is a bit dull to teach to children,
Yes, I think you've hit a nail on it, and this is a good thing to talk about, because this is perhaps an area where I've kind of changed my mind or got a bit softer. And I think a lot of this falls into kind of the bracket of utopian thought for me, this kind of idea, and I was very much on board with it, the idea that perhaps if we could just increase rationality and chip away religion, people will be swatting down on the Enlightenment and reading David Hume, and everyone will be great. And it's just not how humans work. It's just not how things go. And I think I kind of settled for the idea that we need to keep it out of government, schools, my personal life, and that's where I'll be happy. You do you. I think I've had a bit of a journey with sort of vegetarianism as well in that regard. I was always of the view that it's just going to take a bit of progress, and people are going to reduce their meat consumption, and we're going to see a change. And what we see, if you look at the data in the cold light of day, is as vegetarians are increasing and the vegan market's increasing, meat eaters are increasing at the same time. So it's having no real effect on that.
Just developing.
Well, that as well, and a lot of the developing nations are kind of adopting the factory farming method. So this debate is not going to be settled by vegans and vegetarians convincing people to forgo meat, because they're not going to, or certainly not enough people will. So I think we have to kind of look towards a technological intervention like cultured meat, lab meat, etc. That'll win the day. So have a burger if you want. I think I've come a little bit less militant on that score. But this Christianity thing's really fascinating to me, coming out of these atheist circles now and seeing kind of, because Richard Dawkins got in hot water not so long ago for saying that he's culturally Christian because he likes church architecture and hymns, and he thinks it's preferable to Islamic tradition and culture. He'd rather that our country have a Christian tradition than an Islamic one, and it's all very reasonable. However, all the American organisations that are in that kind of atheist, secular, humanist sphere all lost their head over these comments that's Richard Dawkins has somehow lost the plot. And I suppose, like, you describe yourself as Jewish, but you're not particularly religious as far as I'm aware. You do talk about dipping in and out of traditions in your book a little bit. How do you feel about religion as purely a cultural thing, a tradition? Because as I'm getting older, and this is, I imagine, falling into that stereotypical trap of moving a bit more to the conservative side of things, I'm taking more value in tradition and familiarity in that regard.
Hark the herald angels sing.
I need to ask you about Santa. Remind me to ask you about Santa as well.
Okay. look, I went to a Christian school, private school, so they just all are, So our Father who art in heaven, forgive us our trespasses and all that shit, and
daily baguette,
the daily baguette, lest we beget, and so we went to like Christmas carols and stuff like that, and there's some of the most beautiful songs, and also I've come to find, and I didn't even realize this, that a lot of the music I enjoy is very gospel or very Christian or very religious like. I mean, every time there's a song, I don't listen to the radio much, but if there's a song that comes on, if it sort of sounds vaguely Christian in that sense, I find myself enjoying it. I'm thinking of Kanye West, Jesus Walks, or there was that guy who had a song about being gay, Hosier or something. My religion, I don't know.
Take Me to Church.
Yeah, Take Me to Church. Yeah, I think it's about being gay. So it's obviously anti-religion in that sense, but it's got a religious sound.
Yes, so, it's very gospel. It kind of quotes Christopher Hitchens in the song as well, which is nice. It's definitely a pro-atheist anthem.
Yeah, but drawing on Christian culture just with the sounds. And so that, obviously that's something that just comes from childhood, doesn't it? It's ingrained in you, and I think it's really, really beautiful. There's so much magic and wonder in the Christian stories. The Jewish ones, obviously I had to hear the Jewish ones, it's Old Testament. They always felt very dry and hot and deserty. They didn't really appeal to me in the same way. They felt like, it's hot and sweaty, and we're getting the pharaohs doing this and that, and there's frogs. I can't be dealing with that. But it's stories. And Dawkins said in this debate he had that he's always said he was a cultural Christian. People are saying he's changed. He said this 30 years ago. It's just it wasn't really picked up because it wasn't a controversial point to make. He grew up in that same kind of thing. And anyone who's grown up in England, particularly, I imagine he went to a posh school like mine, and that there's Latin everywhere and there's Christian stuff everywhere, and it's probably nostalgia as much as anything else. He said that the issue with Islam, he actually didn't want to push that the Islamic texts were any worse than the Christian ones, which Ayan was trying to suggest. Dawkins was saying, look, the books are the books and they say a bunch of mad nonsense, but one of them, the people who adhere to it, are 700 years in the past, and that's a huge problem right now. So I suppose Christianity's benefited from looking very benign compared to Islam, but if someone says they're a Christian, it's absolutely fine. It doesn't bother me, and it probably bothers me a lot more when someone says they're woke. So we have sort of united the atheists and the religious people have united against this greater force of destruction, I think, right now.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've noticed that as well. And in terms of Santa, just because I tie this in, because this is a thing that comes up in your book in terms of keeping secrets from kids, and kids will eventually find out that Santa doesn't exist. I've read kind of secular parenting books. They suggest that instilling the idea of Santa in children is a bad idea because eventually the children will come to the realization that their parents are incredible liars, unable to keep secrets from them, and that's the takeaway. I kind of think there's got to be a middle ground there in terms of balance, but I just wondered, as maybe someone from a Jewish background who perhaps didn't celebrate Christmas, or perhaps you did, it never really came into my thought that there's a whole bunch of Jewish people in the Western world who never had that thing of Santa's delivering the presents, Santa's coming down the chimney, this little white lie parents had to tell. And I'm just wondering, is that an advantage in terms of Jewish culture, or do they feel like they're missing out perhaps?
I'm going to disappoint you here, because most Jewish people are very assimilated in whatever culture they're in. Now, part of that comes from an advantage in looking mostly, I mean, some people can tell certain features or whatever, but looking mostly like they're white, so that part of it comes from that. But you also have other cultures who don't look white, who are very, very good at assimilating. You get certain Eastern cultures and whatever who come in, and there are others, as we know, who are really, really not very good at it. So most secular Jews do celebrate, at least in the ones I knew, we all celebrated Christmas. We loved Christmas. It was all, so my childhood was filled with stockings on the door, a big fat man. Also, we had Santa. I don't know what joke that. I don't even know what that means. Who the other fat man would be in that joke. But Santa and all that. Presents. I think once or twice I have a vague memory of Hanukkah instead. But even then, it's like Hanukkah goes from being this, like, I suppose it's this old worldy festival, again, like dirty and dry and hot, about candles. Someone was it's going to kill some people, the Jews probably, and there was a candle that lasted for 8 days, and Moses lived to 800 years, some such thing, I don't know. But even that becomes basically every night you get a present for 8 days. It's Christmas, it's Christmas, but it's rubbish because I started to realize, no, I want the big presents that you get at Christmas. The Hanukkah ones were like these little pathetic ones. So from then on, we always did Christmas. And even if we did Hanukkah, it would be both of them. I think Orthodox Jews, of course, who I believe make up the minority of Jews today, at least in the UK, probably don't celebrate Christmas, just as Jehovah's Witnesses don't, just as Muslims don't, or whatever. And I think they do miss that magic, but then I'm sure that they have untold number of other stories that they're told. And that was one of the points I think I make about the Hasidic Jewish community. I've non-stop criticized it, but I think it speaks to what you and I are talking about with regards to religion anyway. I've criticized, but you can't deny that we've also lost something. We have, in the West, individual liberty, which I think you and I value almost above anything else. I value that so highly. It's my favorite thing, individual liberty. But the world is complicated. You can't have everything you want all the time. That's too idealistic. And you do lose some things. And what you lose is the kind of community that you get in the Hasidic Jewish community or any other kind of religious or extreme religious community, where kids will gather around an elder who will tell them stories that are mystical and mad, and you look forward to it all day and you can't wait for your story. And you look at that, and then you look at all of us where the kids are sat with their iPads and whatever. There is something a little bit lost. However, I would not trade it in a million years, because the fact is they don't have the individual liberty that we have. They can't just leave. They can't just do what they want, particularly women. It's for a lot of women, it's an awful, awful place. For some of the women in it, they love it, and they don't understand why others don't, because they love the collectivism. And that's the age-old debate that will never probably get past, of individualism versus collectivism. So that's a long story, a long answer to your question about Santa.
That's a great point, though. I think just anecdotally as well, in terms of parents doing strange things to uphold silly myths. In my house that we grew up in, we had a fireplace, but at some point this got boarded up and decorated over, and then me and my sister were very concerned about how Santa was going to access the house. So my dad had, every year for a long time, unscrew this board on the fireplace. And as we got older and would discuss this with him as adults, we'd just say, why didn't you lie and say Santa's got a magic key and can just let himself in? And you could see kind of the penny drop and the kind of blood drain from his face after having to do a mini DIY project every December.
Yeah, but that's where he hid the bodies.
That's where he hid the bodies, yeah. But this, annoyingly, has flown very quickly, and I have still got a million more questions. Do you have a 5 minutes just for maybe one more?
Let's go, man.
Well, I mean, we can either talk about polygraphs and how they are a massive part of popular culture but are pretty unreliable, or influencers and why you think they kind of latch on to kind of cult leader dynamics. What grabbing your attention more in them two questions?
I'm imagining like the audience, like 50-50, what do they want to hear about? I like the audience thing, influencers stuff. So I could just quickly say the psychopath stuff in the book, because it's all about secrets and getting secrets out of people. The remarkable thing is that psychopaths are not actually any better than the rest of us at faking lie detectors or passing lie detectors when because the base rate is so sensitive. You have to measure someone's base rate for hours and hours to get a good reading of what they're like when they're not lying. And then if there's the slightest change, so the psychopaths have a much lower reaction threshold than we do, but or than I do. You might be one for all I know. But they because it has to be so sensitive then, because their base answers are also very subdued, that we notice these things. And also because they have something called duper's delight, where they get excited that they're lying to you, and that gives them away. So statistically, they're no better than the rest of us at hiding it. But what do you want to know about audience and influencers?
Well, you kind of latch onto the idea that the patterns that they kind of portray and the behavior, it really is kind of parallel with what you'd expect from cult leaders of yesteryear, the things that they do. And you even kind of tie this back in a little bit to a YouTube course you went on to help you, get better at being a YouTube personality. And you kind of felt that they were almost encouraging you in a way to behave like some sort of cult leader.
Yeah. Well, you're right. That was a great course I did, and also there's a book called Cultish by Amanda Montell that I was a big fan of. And I mean, the takeaway is cultish. Cultism is on a spectrum, and this is something that a lot of the cult people, for some reason, they don't like you saying it, because I think the people who talk about cults, the experts and everything, because I think they like very much having that delineation of that's a cult, that's not. And I mean, okay, maybe you can talk about it in that way, but you can't deny that even your local book club is in some ways cultish, right? If you get to a point where you're thinking, gosh, I can't actually say what I think about this book in front of the other book club members because they will ostracize me. And if you get to a point where that's all you really have in your social life, right, is your book club, suddenly you really are under that kind of suppressed spell where you can't say what you want and you're worried. And if you leave, if they kick you out, you're out. Maybe there's a bit of a bully at the top of it who's in charge. So that can be cultish. Now, it's not a 10 out of 10 like Scientology or Heaven's Gate, but maybe it's a 2 out of 10 for cultishness. So I think everything has a bit of cultishness. And when we say cultishness, we're just talking about tribal dynamics and when they become a bit extreme or just human beings. So I think every company could learn from cults in some respects. They could learn certain cultish things to do better. And I think that's no different for YouTubers. And that can be problematic because YouTubers, unlike companies, they really are led by one enigmatic figure who talks about politics and the world and all of these things that they can convince their members to believe. I first started realizing this when I was starting out, and I did this course called Video Creators. It was some Mormon guy who runs it, and it was really good. And I think what was interesting was the course, I thought, and I think most people would think, okay, you want to be a good YouTuber, here's what you have to do. Oh, you have to do all the SEO, and you've got to put the certain words in certain places and make sure the photo's to the right and not the left or whatever. I don't know. I thought it would be that kind of advice. And it was actually just basic psychology, really, for anyone starting any kind of company or any kind of following, because that's what it is. You are getting a following and a bunch of subscribers. And it was just psychology. Who is your audience? Think about who they are. What do they want to click on? If you were them, what would be so clickable that they couldn't possibly move away and not click on it? And as it progressed through the days, it was a day-by-day course, and day 15 or whatever, it started to get into things that really reminded me of cults. So one of them would be rituals. You have to do a different ritual a lot, like certain things you say at the beginning. I can't remember what it is that Russell Brand says, but he says, my lovelies or something, my extravagant wonderfuls, something ridiculous like that. He says every time with like his hands up in the screen. You've got icons, which behind me, you see I've got this blue light, I've got some orange light. It's decorative, but that's whatever, they know. They turn it on. Oh, that's Andrew's icons. That's what it is. You need to have non-believers. This was something I learnt doing Sean Atwood's show with you. Sean is big on non-believers. Now, Sean does this very naturally. I don't think he's sitting there being Machiavellian, but he got involved in all sorts of podcast wars. So those are the non-believers, the enemies, basically. He's very conspiratorial. When the connection goes down, he'll say to the audience, but then to me privately as well, he really does believe this. And sometimes it might even be true because he's half convinced me. They're out to get us. They've been attacking the internet in my house and all of this stuff. And I don't know about hackers. And he sort of was a bit annoyed at me when I said that. So maybe that can happen. But even so, talking about these things creates an us and them. You decide which YouTuber you're going to follow and who the enemy is. And it creates this kind of cult stuff going on. And it can be very worrying because it's intoxicating having... For all the people that criticize us, you have thousands and thousands. You scroll down the comments of people saying, oh, I love this guy. Oh, he's so good. He's so right about everything. If you're not careful, you can become a bit cult leadery. And it's hard to then, any argument or debate you have with friends of yours in your life, you're thinking, yeah, but 10,000 people agree with me on my YouTube channel, mate. It's very hard to just still be a normal, modest, humble guy. And I think you just have to try and remind yourself all the time that you're a cunt and you're going to die.
That is the perfect soundbite to end on. I think that's going to be the caption for this episode and the episode title. You're a cunt and you're going to die. That is beautiful, Andrew. And sincerely, I loved the book. I really did. And it was good to... This is me not just doing a prosocial lie here, by the way. This is sincerity. And yeah, it's nice to get my head out the headspace of kind of culture wars, because it's not that at all. I wouldn't normally pick up a book about secrets. My opening question really for this interview, I was going to ask you why secrets, but then you kind of play your hand at the end of the book, which I won't ruin for people who haven't read it as well. But I mean, I suppose my last question is, the thing that you talk about a lot in this book is that we tend to feel that if we tell people our secrets, it's almost a privilege. We're almost doing something for them, letting them in, whereas you kind of frame this as a burden in many respects. How do you feel about that in terms of secrets now, doing all the research you've done? Would you rather somebody told them their deepest, darkest secrets, or would you rather kind of not be burdened with them?
Yeah, it's really hard, because if they hadn't, I wouldn't have written the book. I mean, you're right that at the end I give away the real reason I wrote the book, but in the first chapter there are other points about, people kept telling me their secrets while I was doing the podcast. People would just message me, and the first thing they'd say was, "Hi, Andrew." I'd never spoken to them before. "Hi, Andrew. When I was 5, my grandpa put his hand down my..." And I was like, okay, all right. I don't know why I'm being told this. So it relieves you. In tribes, again, evolutionarily, it makes sense that it might hurt you to keep a secret. It might feel painful. Your bodies might have made it feel painful so that you reveal the secrets, because a tribe can only truly function when people are being honest with one another. I mean, for the most part, at least. If you've got everybody hiding food from everyone else, everyone's just going to kill each other. Those tribes wouldn't have succeeded. So it makes sense that the tribes and the humans who found it painful to actually keep secrets, and so had to reveal them, would have survived longer and passed on their genes. So it does hurt to keep a secret, and we want to share them with people. But when we do, we are giving them the burden of your secret, and it's painful for them then to keep the secret. And that's why really I tried so hard to find a solution for this in the book, but there's no real way to get rid of your secret and have it kept, because studies have shown that no matter how close your friend is, and no matter how important the secret is, they don't keep it. They tell at least one or two other people. They just do. And that is a generalization, but it's like 90-95% will tell other people your secret. Like it won't be kept. So if you're just intent on telling someone and saying, "Don't tell anyone this," but you just got to accept, unless they don't know anyone you know. That's the best way. And that's why they tell podcasters, because you don't know anyone that they know. It's not going to happen. But that's mostly why I did it. And look, it is a way to string together a lot of the weird stories about the paedophiles, the exorcist, the abortion woman, this mad, weird, murdery stories. And I think it does, in some ways, it's not culture wars at all. It's way outside of it, as you say. But at the same time, the first few chapters in particular, there's so much about authoritarianism and cults and the way that they keep secrets and make you keep secrets. And there's a lot on virtue signaling and that kind of thing as well, that I think will keep the culture wars interested people interested as well. So that's the psychology of secrets. My adventures with murderers, cunts, and influencers.
Perfect. Where can people find more of you on the socials and your various YouTube channels?
Just type Andrew Gold. I'm not the singer. There's a singer with my name. Put Andrew Gold Journalist or Andrew Gold YouTube. Heretics is the one with the culture war stuff. Don't go to the other one. And get the book, Psychology of Secrets. If you're in America, you have to get the UK amazon.co.uk, Psychology of Secrets. Get hold of that and ship it over. And it's got really good reviews, so you'll enjoy it. It's fun. It's a fun read.
Definitely. Well worth your time. Thank you, Andrew. This has flown by. It's always good fun speaking to you. I'm glad we got a chance to catch up.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, buddy.
Cheers, mate.